The stars in the Kepler 442 system had never seen such violence. 7 beautiful ships moved through space like floating crystals, their blue hulls shining in the distant sunlight. These were Zephyrian vessels, carrying thousands of people who had fled their dying world. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the scanner screens with growing worry. His people had been traveling for months, looking for a new home. After their planet fell to war, the convoy carried not just refugees but also their greatest scientists, artists, and leaders. Everything that remained of Zephyrian culture was in these 7 ships. "Commander, we have movement on the outer sensors," reported his navigation. "Officer," her voice tight with fear. Veltar looked at the display and felt his blood turn cold. Red dots appeared on the screen, dozens of them moving fast toward the convoy. The ships were dark and angular like metal daggers cutting through space. He knew those shapes. Every Zephyrian did. "Korthak hunters," he whispered. The Korthak Dominion was known across the galaxy for one thing. They took what they wanted and destroyed the rest. Their ships were built for war, covered in armor and weapons. They had been expanding their territory for decades, crushing any race that stood in their way. "How did they find us?" asked Sub-Commander Ithara from her position at the weapons console. Veltar shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. All ships prepare for battle, raise shields, and charge weapons." The 7 Zephyrian ships moved into a defensive formation, their crystal hulls now glowing with energy shields. Their weapons were elegant things that fired beams of pure light, designed more for precision than destruction. They had never been meant for a fight like this. The Korthak ships came out of hyperspace like a pack of wild animals. There were 30 of them, led by a massive battlecruiser that was bigger than 3 Zephyrian ships put together. The smaller hunter ships spread out around the convoy like wolves surrounding sheep. "They're jamming our communications," reported the communications officer. "I can't reach the other ships." Veltar gripped his command chair as the first Korthak weapons fired. Green energy bolts streaked across space, slamming into the Zephyrian shields. The flagship shook under the impact, lights flickering on the bridge. "Return fire," Veltar ordered. The Zephyrian ships fought back with their light beams, hitting several Korthak vessels. But for every shot they landed, 10 more came back at them. The Korthak ships were too fast, too many, and too well armed. One of the refugee ships, the smallest of the convoy, took a direct hit to its engine section. The beautiful crystal hull cracked and began to leak atmosphere into space. Emergency signals flashed across Veltar's screen as the ship fell out of formation. "We can't keep this up," Ithara said, her voice barely heard over the sound of weapons, fire, and alarms. "Their shields are too strong, and we're outnumbered 5 to 1. Another Zephyrian ship exploded in a ball of blue fire. Veltar watched in horror as thousands of his people died in an instant. The remaining ships tried to group together, but the Korthak hunters were everywhere, attacking from all sides. The flagship's shields began to fail. Sparks flew from control panels as another wave of green energy hit them. The lights went out for a moment, and when they came back on, half the bridge crew was injured. "Shield generators are offline," reported the engineer, blood running down his face. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they break through our hull." Veltar looked around his bridge, seeing the fear in his crew's eyes. These were good people, scientists and explorers, not warriors. They had never wanted to fight anyone. They just wanted to find a safe place to live. But the Korthak didn't care about that. They saw only weakness to exploit and technology to steal. Already Veltar could see the boarding ships launching from the enemy cruiser, coming to capture whatever survivors they could find. "Sir, what are your orders?" Ithara asked. Veltar closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of all the people counting on him. The children in the lower decks, the elderly who remembered better times, the young couples who dreamed of starting families on a new world. He couldn't let them all die without trying everything. "Open all communication channels," he said. "Every frequency we have. Sir, send out a distress call, full power, wide broadcast. Maybe someone out there will hear us." The communications officer looked confused but did as ordered. All channels open, sir. Full power transmission ready. Veltar took a deep breath. He didn't know if anyone was listening or if they would care even if they heard, but he had to try. "This is Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian refugee fleet," he said into the microphone. "We are under attack by Korthak forces in the Kepler 442 system. Our ships are failing and our people are dying. If anyone can hear this message, we need help. We have civilians on board, including children. Please, if there is anyone out there who can help us, we are running out of time." He nodded to the communications officer, who sent the message out into space on every frequency their equipment could reach. The signal raced away from the battle at the speed of light, carrying their desperate plea into the darkness. Another explosion shook the ship. The Korthak were getting ready to board them. In a few minutes it would all be over. But far away, at the edge of human space, a small mining ship was finishing its work on an asteroid. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking coffee and reading reports when his communications officer picked up something strange on the radio. "Captain, you need to hear this." Captain Jake Morrison was a big man with rough hands and gray hair. He had spent 20 years in the Earth Navy before retiring to run mining operations in the outer colonies. His ship, the Desert Rose, was not pretty to look at. It was a converted cargo hauler with mining equipment bolted to its sides and basic weapons that were mostly for scaring off pirates. The ship's bridge was small and cramped, filled with the smell of coffee and machine oil. Morrison sat in his captain's chair looking over the day's mining reports. They had pulled good amounts of rare metals from the asteroid field, enough to make the trip profitable. "Captain, I'm picking up something weird on the radio," said Danny Walsh, the ship's pilot and communications officer. Danny was young, maybe 25, with quick hands and a talent for flying that had gotten him this job despite his lack of formal training. Morrison looked up from his reports. "What kind of weird?" "It's not human, sir. The language is all wrong, but the computer is trying to translate it. Sounds like someone asking for help." Morrison stood up and walked over to Danny's station. The speakers were crackling with static, but underneath he could hear something that sounded like panic. The translation program was working slowly, putting English words to the alien sounds. "This is Commander something. Zephyrian refugee fleet. Under attack. Korthak forces. People are dying. Need help." Morrison frowned. In all his years in space, he had never heard of Zephyrians or Korthaks. Earth had made contact with a few alien races, but these names were new to him. "Where's it coming from?" he asked. Danny checked his instruments. "About 3 hours away at full speed, right at the edge of our sensor range." Lisa Parker, the ship's engineer, looked up from her workstation. She was a small woman with dark hair and smart eyes who could fix anything that broke on the Desert Rose. "You thinking about checking it out, Captain?" Morrison scratched his beard, thinking the smart thing would be to ignore the signal and head home. The Desert Rose was a mining ship, not a warship. Whatever was happening out there was not their problem. But something about the desperation in that alien voice bothered him. Morrison had been in bad spots before, times when he needed help and hoped someone would care enough to try. "Danny, can you get a better read on what's happening out there?" "I'm trying, sir, but the signal is getting weaker. Whatever's going on, it sounds like it's getting worse." Lisa walked over to join them. "Captain, if there really are aliens fighting out there, we might be flying into something we can't handle. The Desert Rose has mining lasers and some basic shields, but we're not built for combat." Morrison nodded. He knew she was right. But he also knew that if they were wrong, if these were real people asking for help, he would never forgive himself for walking away. "Danny, how long to get there?" 3 hours at maximum burn, sir." Morrison looked around his small bridge at his crew. These were good people who trusted him to make the right choices. Danny was eager for adventure, always ready to try something new. Lisa was careful and smart, but she had a good heart. They would follow him wherever he decided to go. "Set course for the signal," Morrison said. "Full speed." "Aye, sir," Danny said, his hands already moving over the controls. The Desert Rose turned away from the asteroid field and accelerated toward the unknown. The ship's engines rumbled as they pushed toward maximum speed, racing across empty space toward whatever was waiting for them. 2.5 hours later, Danny called out from his station. "Captain, I'm getting something on the long-range sensors. Multiple contacts and they're moving fast." Morrison looked at the display screen. Dozens of red dots were scattered across the scanner, some moving in formation, others drifting without power. Even from this distance, it was clear that a battle was happening. "Can you tell who's winning?" Lisa asked. Danny shook his head. "Hard to say, but it looks like the smaller group is getting beaten pretty bad. Most of their ships aren't moving anymore." As they got closer, the Desert Rose's sensors began to pick up more details. The ships in the battle were unlike anything Morrison had ever seen. Some were beautiful and graceful, made of what looked like blue crystal. Others were dark and angular, covered in armor and weapons. "The crystal ships match the distress signal," Danny reported. "Those must be the Zephyrians. And the ugly ones are probably the Korthaks," Lisa added. Morrison watched the battle unfold on his screens. The crystal ships were clearly losing. Several were already dead in space, and the rest were being surrounded by the dark vessels. As he watched, one of the beautiful ships exploded in a flash of blue light. "They're getting slaughtered," Danny said quietly. Before Morrison could respond, his communication system crackled to life. A harsh voice spoke in accented English. "Unknown vessel, you will leave this area immediately or be destroyed. This is Korthak space now." Morrison looked at his crew. The smart choice was still to turn around and run. The Korthaks had just told them to leave, and from what he could see, they had the firepower to back up their threats. But on his screen, another crystal ship was taking heavy damage. He could see smaller craft launching from it, probably escape pods carrying survivors. Those were real people out there, fighting for their lives against an enemy that clearly didn't care about mercy. Morrison grabbed his microphone. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Desert Rose. We received a distress call and came to help." The Korthak voice came back, angry now. "Earth? Your species is unknown to us. Leave now or share the fate of these Zephyrian fools." Morrison looked at Lisa and Danny. Both of them were watching him, waiting to see what he would do. The Desert Rose was just one small ship against an entire fleet of alien warships. They had no chance in a straight fight. But Morrison had not lived this long by giving up when things looked bad. Sometimes the impossible was just another word for something nobody had tried yet. "Danny, get us in close to those crystal ships. Lisa, charge up the mining lasers and prep the explosive charges." "Captain, what's the plan?" Lisa asked. Morrison smiled grimly. "We're going to even the odds." The Desert Rose flew straight toward the battle like a tiny metal bee heading into a storm. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the alien warships grow larger on his screen. The Korthak vessels were massive, covered in gun turrets and armor plating. Each one was 3 times bigger than his mining ship. "Captain, they're locking weapons on us," Danny said, his voice tight with worry. Morrison nodded but didn't change course. "Lisa, are those mining charges ready?" "Ready as they'll ever be," Lisa replied from her engineering station. "But Captain, those charges are meant for breaking up asteroids, not fighting warships. Sometimes you have to work with what you have," Morrison said. The Desert Rose raced past the outer edge of the Korthak formation. Several of the dark ships turned to follow, but they were built for heavy combat, not chasing small, fast targets. Morrison's ship was old and ugly, but it was quick when it needed to be. "There," Morrison pointed at his screen. "That big Korthak cruiser in the center. It's the one giving orders to the others." Danny looked at the massive ship and swallowed hard. "Captain, that thing could blow us apart with one shot." "Not if we don't give it the chance," Morrison said. "Get us in close underneath its main guns." The Desert Rose dove toward the Korthak command ship like a missile. The alien vessel was enormous, bigger than some space stations Morrison had seen. Its hull was covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays, all designed to destroy enemies at long range. But the Korthaks had made one mistake. They thought like warriors, planning for battles between big ships with heavy weapons. They never expected a small mining vessel to fly straight at them like a crazy person. "Now, Lisa," Morrison shouted. Lisa triggered the mining charges. Normally, these explosives were used to break apart asteroids so the Desert Rose could collect the valuable metals inside. But today, they had a different target. The charges detonated against the Korthak cruiser's engine section in a chain of bright explosions. The huge ship shuddered and began to list to one side, its main engines failing. Emergency lights flashed along its hull as damage control teams tried to fix the problems. "Direct hit," Danny yelled. "Their engines are down." But the victory celebration was short. The Desert Rose had used all its explosive charges in that one attack, and now the other Korthak ships were turning toward them with all weapons ready. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, working frantically at her controls. The ship took damage from being so close to the explosions. Morrison looked at his screens. The crippled Korthak cruiser was falling behind, but 5 smaller warships were chasing the Desert Rose. Green energy bolts flashed past them, missing by only a few meters. "Danny, can you reach those crystal ships?" Morrison asked. "I think so, Captain. They're about 2 kilometers away." "Get us there. Fast." The Desert Rose raced toward the Zephyrian vessels, with the Korthak hunters right behind them. Morrison could see that most of the beautiful crystal ships were badly damaged. Their blue hulls were cracked and leaking atmosphere into space. Suddenly, one of the Zephyrian ships fired a beam of pure white light at the Korthak ships chasing the Desert Rose. The beam hit one of the hunters square in the center, and the dark ship exploded in a ball of fire. "They're helping us," Danny said with surprise. Morrison grabbed his microphone. "This is Captain Morrison to the Zephyrian ships. We're here to help. Can you understand me?" For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice came through the speakers, speaking heavily accented English. "Captain Morrison, this is Subcommander Ithara. We received your transmission. Why did you come here? Your ship is very small." "Because you asked for help," Morrison said simply. There was a long pause. Then Ithara spoke again, and Morrison could hear the surprise in her voice. "You came because we asked? But we are strangers to you. You do not know us." "Doesn't matter," Morrison replied. "You were in trouble." Another pause. When Ithara spoke again, her voice was different, warmer. "We thank you for your courage, Captain Morrison, but you must escape now. Our ships are too damaged to fight much longer." Morrison looked at his screens. She was right. The Zephyrian ships were in bad shape, and more Korthak vessels were moving in for the final attack. His one successful strike against their command ship had helped, but it wasn't enough to change the outcome of the battle. "Not yet," Morrison said. "Lisa, what's our status?" "We've got hull damage and the shields are almost gone," Lisa reported. "But the engines are still good, and we have the mining lasers." Morrison thought quickly. The mining lasers were designed for cutting through rock, not fighting warships, but they were precise tools, much more accurate than the heavy weapons the Korthaks were using. "Danny, get us close to that damaged Zephyrian ship," Morrison ordered. "The big one that's leaking air." "Captain, that's Commander Veltar's flagship," Ithara said over the radio. "But it is very dangerous. They are about to be boarded by Korthak soldiers." Morrison could see the boarding pods launching from the Korthak ships, heading for the crippled Zephyrian flagship like metal bullets. Once those soldiers got aboard, the battle would be over. "Lisa, can you use the mining lasers to cut those boarding pods loose?" Lisa studied her instruments. "Maybe if I can get a clean shot. But we'll have to get really close." "Do it." The Desert Rose swept toward the Zephyrian flagship, flying between the massive crystal ship and the approaching boarding pods. Lisa fired the mining lasers with surgical precision, cutting through the boarding pod's hull plating like a knife through paper. One by one, the Korthak boarding pods were disabled, their soldiers trapped inside without power or life support. But more were coming, and the Desert Rose was running out of time. "Captain, we have 4 Korthak hunters coming straight at us," Danny warned. Morrison looked at his screens and made a decision that would either save them all or get them killed. Sometimes, when you were outnumbered and outgunned, the only choice was to do something so crazy that the enemy never saw it coming. "Prepare to ram that Korthak cruiser," he ordered. "Captain," Danny's voice went up an octave. "You heard me. Full speed, straight at their bridge section." Lisa and Danny looked at each other, then back at their captain. They had followed Jake Morrison through dangerous situations before, but this seemed like suicide. But they trusted him. And sometimes trust was all you had. "Aye, sir," Danny said, setting course for the enemy ship. Full speed ahead. The Desert Rose flew straight at the Korthak cruiser like an arrow shot from a bow. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the massive alien warship grow larger and larger on his screen. The dark hull was covered in weapon turrets that were all turning toward his small mining ship. "Captain, they're charging their main guns," Danny said, his hands gripping the flight controls so tight his knuckles were white. "Stay on course," Morrison ordered. "Don't give them a clean shot." Lisa was working frantically at her station, trying to squeeze every bit of power from the ship's engines. "Captain, at this speed, when we hit them, we're going to be destroyed." Too. Morrison nodded grimly. He knew that. But sometimes saving others meant making the ultimate sacrifice. "Get to the escape pods, both of you." "Not without you, sir," Danny said firmly. "That's an order," Morrison snapped. "With respect, Captain," Lisa said, not looking up from her controls. "Go to hell. We're staying." Morrison looked at his crew and felt a surge of pride. These were good people, brave people, and he was honored to serve with them. If they were going to die today, at least they would die together, trying to do the right thing. The Korthak cruiser fired its main weapons. Massive green energy beams streaked toward the Desert Rose, but Danny was ready for them. He threw the ship into a spinning dive that took them under the shots by mere meters. 30 seconds to impact, Danny announced. Through his speakers, Morrison could hear Sub-Commander Ithara's voice. "Captain Morrison, what are you doing? You will be killed." "Maybe," Morrison replied into his microphone, "but sometimes you have to take risks to help people." On the Zephyrian flagship, Commander Veltar watched the small human ship racing toward certain death. He had lived for over 200 years and commanded fleets in dozens of battles, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans barely knew the Zephyrians existed, yet they were willing to die to save strangers. "All ships concentrate fire on the Korthak vessels," Veltar ordered. "We must support the humans." The remaining Zephyrian ships turned their weapons toward the enemy fleet. Their white energy beams lanced out across space, striking the Korthak hunters that were trying to intercept the Desert Rose. 15 seconds, Danny called out. The Korthak cruiser was huge now, filling their entire view screen. Morrison could see individual weapon ports and sensor arrays on its dark hull. Korthak soldiers were visible through some of the windows, probably wondering what kind of crazy aliens would try to ram a ship 10 times their size. 5 seconds. Morrison closed his eyes and thought of Earth, of blue skies and green grass and all the people he would never see again. Then he opened his eyes and watched as his ship crashed into the Korthak cruiser. But at the last second, something unexpected happened. The Desert Rose didn't hit the cruiser's armored hull. Instead, it punched through a damaged section that had been weakened by the earlier mining charge explosions. The small ship drove deep into the cruiser's interior like a spear. The impact threw everyone on the Desert Rose against their restraints. Sparks flew from control panels and the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. "Are we dead?" Danny asked weakly. Morrison looked around. His bridge, they were all hurt, but they were alive. Through the main view screen, he could see they were inside the Korthak ship, surrounded by twisted metal and sparking cables. "Lisa, damage report," Morrison ordered. Lisa checked her instruments with shaking hands. "We're stuck inside their hull. The Desert Rose is never flying again. But life support is working and we still have emergency power." Morrison stood up carefully, testing his bruised ribs. "Then we're not done yet." The ramming attack had done more damage than Morrison had hoped. The Desert Rose had torn through several decks of the Korthak cruiser, destroying important systems, and cutting power to half the ship. The massive vessel was drifting helplessly, its weapons offline. Outside, the battle was turning. Without their command ship giving orders, the Korthak hunters were confused and disorganized. The Zephyrian ships, damaged as they were, began to fight back more effectively. But the victory was short-lived. More Korthak ships were arriving, called by the distress signals from the damaged cruiser. These were fresh vessels with full weapons and shields, and they were angry about what had happened to their flagship. "Captain Morrison," came Ithara's voice over the radio. We are detecting more enemy ships approaching. A full battle group, at least 20 vessels. Morrison looked at his screens. The new Korthak fleet was massive, led by a ship even bigger than the one he had just rammed. This had to be their main force come to finish what the first group had started. How long until they arrive? Morrison asked. Less than 1 hour, Ithara replied. Captain, you and your crew must escape. We will try to hold them off. Morrison shook his head even though she couldn't see him. We're not going anywhere. Our ship is stuck inside this cruiser. He looked around his damaged bridge, thinking hard. They were trapped inside an enemy warship, outnumbered and outgunned, with a fresh Korthak fleet on the way. By any reasonable measure, they should surrender and hope for mercy. But Morrison had never been reasonable, and he wasn't about to start now. Lisa, what kind of systems are we connected to in this ship? Lisa studied her readings. We punched through their power distribution center. I might be able to access their computer network. Can you cause them problems? Lisa smiled for the first time since the crash. Captain, I can cause them all kinds of problems. Danny looked up from his pilot station. What's the plan, sir? Morrison looked at his crew, these brave people who had followed him into an impossible situation. Outside he could see the Zephyrian ships regrouping, preparing for another hopeless battle against overwhelming odds. We're going to turn this Korthak ship into our weapon, Morrison said, and we're going to show these bullies what happens when they pick on people who can't fight back. Lisa was already working, her fingers flying over her controls as she hacked into the alien computer systems. Give me 10 minutes, Captain. I think I can take control of their weapons. Morrison smiled grimly. The Korthaks thought they had won when they trapped the humans inside their ship, but they didn't understand humans very well. When you cornered a human, when you made them desperate, that's when they became most dangerous. The real fight was about to begin. Lisa Parker had always been good with computers, but alien technology was something completely new. Her fingers moved across the Desert Rose's control panels as she tried to understand the Korthak ship's systems. The alien computer network was like a maze full of strange symbols and programs she had never seen before. How's it going? Captain Morrison asked, watching over her shoulder. It's complicated, Lisa said, sweat running down her face. Their language is nothing like ours, but I think I'm starting to figure out their weapon controls. Outside the crippled Korthak cruiser, the new enemy fleet was getting closer. Morrison could see them on his damaged screens, 20 dark ships, moving through space like a pack of wolves. The largest was a massive battleship that made even the cruiser they were trapped in look small. Captain Morrison, came Commander Veltar's voice over the radio. The enemy fleet will be here in 30 minutes. We must try to escape. Morrison looked at the Zephyrian ships on his screen. There were only 4 left now, and all of them were badly damaged. Their beautiful crystal hulls were cracked and scorched from the battle. Commander, how many people do you have left? Morrison asked. Perhaps 3,000 souls, Veltar replied sadly. We started with over 10,000. Morrison felt anger rise in his chest. These Korthaks had killed 7,000 innocent people just because they could. Refugees who had already lost their homeworld now dying in the cold of space far from everything they knew. Got it, Lisa suddenly shouted. I'm in their weapon system. Morrison looked at her screen. Lists of alien words scrolled past, but some of them were starting to make sense as the translation program worked. Can you fire their guns? Morrison asked. Better than that, Lisa said with a grin. I can control their whole ship. Engines, weapons, shields, everything. Danny looked up from his station. Captain, the Korthak fleet just sent us a message. Morrison nodded. Put it through. A harsh voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented English. This is War Chief Graktoth of the Korthak Dominion. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. Your pathetic resistance ends now. Morrison picked up his microphone. This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. We don't surrender to bullies. There was a pause. Then cruel laughter came through the speakers. Earth? Your weak species will be our next target after we finish with these Zephyrian fools. You have made a grave mistake interfering with Korthak business. Maybe, Morrison said. But you made a bigger mistake. What mistake is that, human? Morrison looked at Lisa, who gave him a thumbs up. She had complete control of the Korthak cruiser's systems now. You let us get inside your ship, Morrison said into the microphone. Before Graktoth could reply, Lisa fired the cruiser's main weapons at the approaching Korthak fleet. The massive energy cannons that had been designed to destroy the Zephyrian ships now turned on their own people. Green energy beams lanced out from the crippled cruiser, striking two of the smaller Korthak ships. The vessels exploded in balls of fire, their crews never knowing what hit them. Impossible, came Graktoth's voice, filled with rage and disbelief. Lisa, can you move this ship? Morrison asked. The engines are damaged, but I think I can get us moving, Lisa replied, her hands flying over the controls. The Korthak cruiser began to move, slowly turning toward the enemy fleet. Its weapons fired again and again, each shot controlled by Lisa from inside the ship. The other Korthak vessels scattered, confused and angry, not knowing how their own ship had turned against them. All Zephyrian ships, this is Morrison, the captain said into his radio. We've got control of this cruiser. Form up behind us and follow our lead. Captain Morrison, came Veltar's amazed voice. How did you accomplish this? We've got a really good engineer, Morrison replied. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The captured Korthak cruiser, controlled by 3 humans trapped inside its hull, led the charge against the enemy fleet. Behind it came the damaged Zephyrian ships, their white energy beams joining the cruiser's green cannons. Lisa fought the battle like she was playing a video game, using the cruiser's powerful weapons to protect the Zephyrian ships. Danny helped by plotting courses and finding weak spots in the enemy formation. Morrison coordinated the attack, talking to both his crew and the Zephyrian commanders. The Korthaks had expected an easy victory over a handful of refugees and 1 small human ship. Instead, they found themselves fighting their own technology, turned against them by people they had thought were weak and primitive. Target their command ship, Morrison ordered. Lisa aimed the cruiser's weapons at Graktoth's massive battleship. The green energy beams struck the enemy vessel's shields, causing them to flicker and fail. The Zephyrian ships concentrated their fire on the same target, their precise white beams cutting through the battleship's armor. My ship is damaged, came Graktoth's angry voice. All vessels retreat to hyperspace. Not so fast, Morrison said. He grabbed his microphone. This is Captain Morrison to all Korthak ships. You came here to destroy innocent people. Now you want to run away when things get tough? We will return, human. Graktoth snarled. The Korthak Dominion does not forget. Good, Morrison replied. When you get home, tell everyone what happened here. Tell them that the Zephyrians have friends now. Tell them that humans don't abandon people who need help. The Korthak fleet jumped into hyperspace, leaving the battlefield to the humans and Zephyrians. The space around them was filled with floating debris and the hulks of destroyed ships, but the refugees were alive. Captain Morrison, came Veltar's voice, filled with emotion. We owe you a debt we can never repay. Morrison looked around his damaged bridge at Lisa and Danny. They were hurt and tired, but they were smiling. They had done something important today, something that mattered. You don't owe us anything, Morrison said. That's what friends do for each other. 3 months later, the first joint human Zephyrian base was built in the asteroid field where the battle had taken place. Lisa Parker worked alongside Zephyrian engineers, combining human creativity with alien technology to create things neither species could have built alone. Danny Walsh became an instructor at the New Flight Academy, teaching Zephyrian pilots how to think like humans when they flew. His students learned that sometimes the best way to win was to do something so unexpected that the enemy never saw it coming. Captain Jake Morrison returned to Earth as humanity's first ambassador to an alien species. But he never forgot the lesson he had learned in that distant star system, that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what was right even when you were afraid. And in the darkness between the stars, other species began to hear stories about humans and Zephyrians working together. Some were curious, others were worried, but all of them understood that something had changed in the galaxy, something that would never be the same again.